The rain had not let up in 3 days. It came in slow sheets now, steady and bitter, whispering across the stone bridge and drumming soft as grief on the sagging roof of a canvas tarp strung low between the bent fence posts. Mud puddled thick around the legs of a tired mule, and the creek below had turned to a churning mess of brown water and broken branches. On the north bank, beneath the bridge's narrow arch, a woman sat with her knees drawn up to her chest, her back against the cold stone. She held a child in each arm. The others were scattered close, curled against one another beneath wool blankets, their breaths rising in soft puffs. Her dress clung wet to her leg. The hem was frayed, the fabric stiff with old dirt and smoke. Her boots had holes she had long stopped trying to mend. A boy no older than 6 coughed in his sleep, and her arm shifted just enough to pull him closer. Mabel did not cry. She had learned by now not to waste the water. The wind lifted her hair in damp strands and pushed smoke from the dying fire out into the open. The wood had been soaked when she found it, and it hissed and cracked without heat. She watched it, hollow-eyed. Her body ached with hunger and with something deeper, older. The sort of ache that settled in your bones when the world no longer noticed if you stood or lay down. Somewhere down the road, a wagon passed. She didn't lift her head. She had nothing left to ask for. The last man who had seen her holding out her hand had spat in the dirt and told her she should have thought twice before spreading her legs for a man too dead to provide. She had said nothing. What words could she offer that might change a man like that? The baby whimpered. She shifted again, numbed arms cradling him to her breast, though the milk was near gone. He latched anyway, desperate, and she closed her eyes. When they first arrived in Fort Field, she had told herself it would be temporary, just a stop. A town was a place where you might find work, or maybe the kindness of a churchwoman with too many pies and not enough mouths. But Fort Field had no softness to spare, and no patience for a woman alone, not with 7 mouths to feed and no man to carry a name worth respecting. By the second day, the widow's house was full. By the third, they were sleeping in the livery loft. Then the horse kicked, and the owner said he wouldn't risk his stock over children with more bones than meat on them. So now they were here, beneath a bridge wrapped in burlap sacks, with the rain gnawing at the edges of the last fire she knew how to build. She could still see Eli sometimes, in the curl of the baby's ears, in the way the middle boy frowned when confused. He'd been soft-minded spoken, but not weak. The war had taken parts of him he never got back, but he'd tried. Worked every fence post and field from Abilene to Kansas City before his lungs gave out one winter under a roof they could barely call a house. She buried him behind the church with no stone. The mule brayed once, and she stirred. One of the children had risen, her eldest girl. Marianne stooped now beside the mule with a scrap of cloth, trying to wipe its flanks. The girl's arms were thin and blue with cold. "You'll catch fever," Mabel said, her voice low, hoarse with sleep and weather. Marianne didn't answer, just kept wiping, lips pressed in a line. Mabel reached into the pocket of her coat, fingers closing around the last bit of biscuit. It was dry and hard and likely bitter, but she called the girl over and pressed it into her hand. "Share that with your brother." The girl nodded, eyes glinting with something unreadable. Guilt, maybe, or something like hope, worn so thin it had nearly become disbelief. The light was just beginning to lift, a weak gray pressing through the trees. Another day, another morning they would survive. Mabel pulled the baby tighter, kissed his temple once, and lay her head back against the cold stone. Her eyes burned but would not close. Then she heard it, the slow sound of hooves in mud, not the hurried trot of a townsman late to his business, nor the clipped pace of a rider with intent. This was slower, careful, a steady rhythm that grew closer, paused, then shifted again. She turned her head. A tall figure sat atop a dark horse just beyond the trees. His coat was dusted with rain, hat low over his brow. One gloved hand rested easy on the saddle horn. He did not speak, did not dismount, but he was watching her, watching the bundle of children half minus hidden under the bridge. And he did not look away. He didn't speak. Not at first. Just let the silence stretch between them like a long rope neither was ready to pull. Rain tapped on the brim of his hat and slid down the horse's flank in thin, silvery threads. Mabel stared back, breath shallow, unsure if he was real or just another figure her mind had conjured from sheer want. Then the man dismounted. It was a slow, deliberate movement. He tied the reins loosely to a nearby branch, then stepped through the slop of mud and leaf rot toward the bridge. His boots made a sucking sound with every step. When he reached the edge of the overhang, he paused and looked at the fire, then at her face. "You got anyone come in for you?" His voice was low, hoarse in the way dust settles into a man's throat after too many long rides. She said nothing. He looked past her at the cluster of children. "You got a name?" Still, she held quiet. Not out of pride, but from a raw instinct that had nothing left to spare. Words meant risk, and words from men too often came with a price. He shifted, took off his hat, and ran a hand through hair that looked more like bark than anything soft. "Name's Levi." The name meant nothing. Not here. Not to her. She stared a moment longer, then said, "Mabel." He nodded as though it had taken no effort at all to wait for her rust. His gaze returned to the children. "They eat yet today?" Her jaw tightened. "We had something last night. Was what I asked." She stared at him with what was left of her defiance. But the truth sat plain between them. The fire was little more than smoke. The mule was ribs and hide. The children were skin over bone. And she was only barely standing in a body that had been running on empty for too long. Levi crouched down and pulled something from his saddlebag, a cloth minus-wrapped parcel. He untied the twine and set it gently on the edge of the fire pit. "Brought jerky, 2 apples, half a loaf of bread. Ain't fresh, but it'll fill a belly." Mabel didn't move. Her fingers gripped the baby tighter. "I ain't here to take nothing from you." He said it without offense, without insistence. "I ain't got a wife. No kids. Just figured God wouldn't miss the bread." She hesitated, then gave a sharp nod toward Marianne. The girl crawled forward, wide mind aside, and opened the parcel like it might vanish if she breathed too hard. The scent of food made the youngest stir and groan, and soon the parcel was passed between little hands. Mabel didn't eat. She watched them, face unreadable. Levi didn't reach for any of it himself. He just stood by the fire, palms out, letting the smoke climb his coat. His eyes moved slow across the camp, not with judgment, but something quieter. Pity maybe, though he wore it soft. "You're not from here," he said after a while. "No. Where was home?" She glanced at him. Wherever he could find work. Cattle mostly. Sometimes mending fences, clearing brush. Levi nodded again, like it made sense. They stood like that for a while, nothing but rain and chewed bread between them. Then he shifted. "I got a place. About 5 miles west. I ain't much, but it's dry. Roof don't leak. Got an extra room if you need it for a while. Just until this weather breaks." She didn't answer. "I won't press," he said, pulling his coat tighter. "But this bridge 'll flood by tomorrow if the rain don't let up. Water's already rise in." He gave her a long, steady look, then turned to mount his horse. She thought he might trot off without another word, but he paused once more, reached into his coat and pulled something small from his pocket. A key. He tossed it gently into the mud near the fire, not close enough to frighten the children. "If you change your mind," he said. "The house is at the end of Larkspur Road. Doors marked with a horseshoe nailed sideways." Then he rode off into the trees, slow as he'd come, not looking back once. The key lay in the mud, half minus buried. Marianne reached for it, but Mabel shook her head. "Leave it." The girl looked at her, confused, but she obeyed. The fire hissed in the damp. Mabel stared into the trees long after he disappeared. The rain did not stop that night. It came harder, colder, angrier. The creek rose, dragging limbs and brush like bones pulled from the earth. The tarp flapped loose from one post and sagged until it spilled rainwater into the children's bedding. Marianne cried out, scrambling to pull her brothers closer. The baby whimpered against Mabel's chest, his skin clammy, breath thin. By dawn the fire was drowned, and the water had crept within inches of the mule's hoof. Mabel stood knee-minus deep in mud, her skirts sodden and heavy. She had not slept. She had watched the edge of the creek with a soldier's attention, her body hunched over her children, as if she could shield them from the whole cruel reach of the sky. The key still sat where he had tossed it, dark with dirt, waiting. She stared at it now, heart thudding slow and stubborn in her chest. Larkspur Road, 5 miles. She didn't know if her legs could carry her that far. Didn't know if the mule would make it. But the water was rising, and her baby was too quiet, and there were bruises beneath her eldest eyes that no child ought to carry. She picked up the key. By mid-morning, they were walking. The mule carried the littlest too. The others walked beside Mabel, half-minus asleep on their feet. Marianne had the cloth parcel tied to her back now, whatever food remained rattling loosely inside. The sky had turned a pale, bruised gray, and the road bled into a slick ribbon of wet clay and horse tracks. Larkspur Road was little more than a name. No sign marked it, just a split in the trees where the mud gave way to dry pine needles in the hush of old woods. They followed it with silence pressed between them, as if even the youngest had learned not to speak too soon of hope. The house came into view just as the sun broke through the clouds. A low 2-room cabin set back from the road, porch half- rotted but clean. A split-rail fence marked the edge of the land. A barn sagged in the distance, its roof patched with rusted tin. And there, nailed to the door, was a horseshoe turned on its side like an open cradle. She froze. The baby stirred against her shoulder. The mule snorted. The children waited. Mabel climbed the steps and fit the key into the lock with trembling fingers. It turned smooth. The door opened into a room of dry wood and the faint smell of tobacco and lye soap. There was a stove in the corner, iron and soot-stained. A table set for none. A pair of boots lined up against the wall like they'd been placed there with quiet care. It was not much, but it was wrong. She turned back to the children and nodded once. No words, just a nod. They rushed past her like wind, laughter coming too fast, wild with relief. Marianne fell to her knees near the stove, her hands reaching for warmth that wasn't even there yet. Mabel stood still in the doorway. She hadn't cried in over a year. Not since Eli coughed blood into her lap and said her name like he was sorry for dying. But now, with her children safe, with the floor beneath her feet and the scent of old wood instead of wet stone, something in her chest cracked loose. A single tear slid down her cheek. She wiped it before it could fall. In the far room, she found a cot with a patchwork quilt and a Bible on the shelf above it. A folded paper lay beside it. Her name, written in a careful, unsure hand. Mabel. Use what you need. Leave when you're ready. No questions. No debts. Well? She stared at the note. Read it twice. Then folded it again and tucked it into the sleeve of her coat. Outside, the sun had broken fully through, casting light on the pine needles on the roof, on the muddy prints left by 7 small feet. She leaned against the doorframe, eyes closed, breath slow. For the first time in weeks, the wind did not bite. It only passed by. The road is long but worth its subscribe and journey further. Levi did not return that day, nor the next. But his presence lingered. She found it in the firewood stack beneath the porch drying neat, in the cracked bar of soap by the basin, and the spare linens folded inside a cedar chest stitched with initials she did not know. Someone had once cared for this place. Whether it was him or a woman before, she could not say. But nothing felt careless. Nothing felt dangerous. She kept her coat on for 2 days straight, sleeping beside the children in the larger of the 2 rooms, the door locked each night. The stove worked well once she got it going, and she made the bread stretch with a tin of beans found in the cupboard. When the youngest threw up from eating to fast, she sat with him through the night, rocking slowly, whispering things she no longer believed in. By the 3rd morning the sun came up clear, cold still but golden through the pine. Mabel rose before the others and stepped outside. The air smelled of thawing earth and smoke. A squirrel darted across the fence rail. In the distance she could hear the faint whine of Saw's men working in town, maybe, far enough not to matter. She rolled up her sleeves and began to wash clothes. The work came natural. Scrubbing, hauling, wringing. There was comfort in it, a kind of order. She hung the blankets over the porch rail to dry and scraped mud from the children's boots with a dull knife. When Marianne woke, Mabel handed her the brush and pointed to the mule. By noon they had swept out the house, shaken the rugs, and boiled what little remained of the beans. The children looked less like ghosts now. There was pink in their cheeks, sleep in their eyes. The baby had begun to coo again, reaching for her with wet fingers. She was brushing her hair by the window when she heard the hooves. Slow, familiar. Levi rode in like H.E.D. never left, saddle thick with supplies, rifle strapped across his back. He nodded once at the children who'd run out to stare, bold now that the man was a memory turned real, and tied his horse to the post. He removed his hat before stepping onto the porch. "You stayed," he said. She didn't smile, but her shoulders dropped a little. The bridge flooded. Figured it would. He set the saddlebags down just inside the door. Brought cornmeal, dried apples, sack of oats, some salt pork too. "Hope it suits." She glanced at the pile, then at him. "Why?" He didn't look away. "Because I had more than I needed, and I reckon you didn't." That answer sat quiet between them. "You left a note," she said. He nodded. "You didn't ask anything in return." "No." She leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. "That makes people nervous. IAINT most people." He stepped out again, into the light, hands resting loose at his sides. "You got a good way with them," he said, nodding toward the children, who were now chasing each other around the mule with shrieks of laughter. "Most folks would have broken by now." "I nearly did," she said. The wind moved between them like a third voice, carrying pine and dash. "You're welcome to stay," he said. "A while. Help me patch the barn, maybe. There's a garden gone to weeds. INT much, but it's better than under a bridge." She studied his face. He didn't press, just waited, still impatient, like a man used to wild horses. After a long moment, she said, "Well worked. Not just take." His mouth twitched, almost a smile. "Didn't expect anything else." She stepped aside, holding the door. "Come in, Levi." And for the first time in a long while she meant it. Levi came in quiet, boots scuffing the worn wood floor, and the door closed behind him with a soft thump. The house was warmer now, lived Midas in. The blankets had been washed and folded. The hearth glowed with a new fire. The air smelled faintly of beans, pine smoke, and something sweet, apple peels left to simmer in a pot of water. He set the last of the supplies near the stove, then stood there a moment, unsure of where to put his hands. The children had gone back to their play outside, the older ones taking turns with the rope they'd found in the barn, skipping it through patches of dry ground. One of the boys, the middle one with Ella's jaw, peeked in the window and disappeared again, giggling. Mabel was watching the stove, stirring slowly with a wooden spoon. She didn't speak, but she hadn't turned him out either. That counted for something. "You got a name for all of them?" he asked. She glanced over her shoulder. "The INT pups." He smiled a little. "Didn't mean it that way." She set the spoon down. "Marianne, Samuel, Ruthie, Eli, Clara, Joseph, and the baby's Micah." He nodded like H.E.D. Write them all down later. "Micah's a good name." His daddy picked it. Silence followed, not sharp but deep, like a creek pooling after a storm. "I can sleep in the barn," he said. "INT right for a man to take up space in a house full of children not his." She looked at him long, then eyes narrowing like she was still measuring his worth in the way he stood, the way he offered space without pride. "There's a cot in the corner room. I won't come in unless you say." She didn't answer right away, just went back to stirring. "You'll think on it." He nodded once. That was enough. The next few days settled like dust on old floorboards. They worked, mostly side by side, quiet, efficient. He showed Samuel how to mend a cracked bucket, and Clara took to brushing the mule like it was her calling. Mabel chopped kindling in the yard while Ruthie read from an old storybook she found on the shelf. Each night Levi ate on the porch, plate in his lap, the stars turning cold above the treetops. And each morning he brought in water before anyone woke. He never asked questions, never pushed, but little by little he became part of the rhythm. It was late in the week when Mabel came out to the barn. The air had gone crisp, and the sun broke through the boards in long, slanted beams. Levi was mending the fence rail behind the stable, hammer in hand. She stood there a moment, arms folded, eyes on the sky. "You ever have a family?" she asked. He didn't turn. "Had a brother. Died young. Parents too. Fever took the lot of 'em back in Texas. I'm sorry. Was a long time ago. Been raiding solo since I was 15. She stepped closer, voice softer now. You ever want one? He paused, hammer still raised, then set it down slowly. Don't know. Always figured it wasn't meant for me. Some men are built for trailin' fence posts, not Sunday dinners and lullabies. But you brought us food. That ain't the same. No, it's better. They stood there, the wind lifting dust around their boots. I'm not looking for saving, she said, voice low. He met her eyes, and I ain't offering it. She nodded, then turned and walked back toward the house, her steps slower this time. That night, she set 2 plates at the table. When Levi came to the porch with his usual rhythm, she opened the door before he knocked. Come sit, she said. You weren't same as the rest of us. He hesitated just a beat, then stepped inside. The children didn't blink twice. And for the first time in a year, Mabel let herself exhale in a room with a man and feel something other than fear. Spring came slow. The frost clung to the mornings like an old grief, reluctant to loosen its grip, even as green things pushed up from the dark. Levi turned the soil behind the cabin with a rusted plow. He repaired himself, and Mabel planted rows with a care that came from memory: onions, carrots, a patch of beans near the fence line. Marianne followed behind, tamping the earth with her heels. It was the first time in weeks Mabel had seen her smile without flinching. They built a life, not by speaking it aloud, but by the things they did without needing to say. He patched the roof, she mended his coat. He left hot water near the basin every morning. She baked bread without being asked. The children no longer watched him like a stranger. They asked about his horse, his tools, the old scar on his knuckle. He answered patiently, sometimes with a dry joke, sometimes with just a shrug. He didn't make himself the center of things, but somehow he ended up there anyway. Late one night, after the children had gone to sleep, Mabel stood at the doorway watching the moon rise over the pines. The air was cool but soft, the kind of soft that only came after you've survived something harsh. Levi came up beside her, his boots soundless in the dark. He didn't speak. She handed him a tin cup filled with weak coffee. He took it and sipped slow. I used to think survival was the end of it, she said quietly. That once you lived through a thing, the rest would come easy. He looked out over the yard where the mule slept near the fence, and the laundry line swayed in the breeze. It don't get easy, he said. Just gets quieter. She nodded. I'm not sure what to do with quiet. Let it be, he said. It'll teach you. They stood there a while, not touching, not needing to. The quiet stretched between them, and for once, it didn't feel empty. It felt earned. A few days later, a man rode up the road, tall, with clean boots and a polished badge, the kind of man who made trouble without raising his voice. He asked Mabel questions she didn't want to answer about the mule, about her name, about whether she had any claim to the land she now stood on. Levi came from the barn with dirt on his hands and calm in his eyes. This your land? The man asked. Levi nodded. Has been since 80-9. You got them living here? I do. They are Cam? They are now. The man looked between them, then at the children peeking through the window. Something in his face shifted, like he'd been hoping for a reason to cause trouble and hadn't found one. Well, he muttered, best get the proper papers signed if you want to keep it that way. Already filed, Levi said, lying without blinking. The man gave a tight nod and rode off. Mabel watched him go, her jaw tight. You didn't have to lay for us, she said. Yes, I did. Why? Because this place feels better with you in it. Her breath caught, like a stitch pulled to fast. That night, she asked him to stay inside, not in her bed, just under the same roof. He did. They didn't speak much, but when she handed him the blanket, their fingers brushed, and neither of them pulled away. Something passed between them. Not heat, not hunger, just the slow, hard-earned flicker of belonging. Summer came with long days and loud skies. Thunderheads built slow in the distance, stacking like smoke over the hills, and the heat pressed down until sweat soaked the seams of their clothes before noon. The creek, once a hungry thing that swallowed bridges, had gentle its banks green with tall grass and yellow blooms. Flies buzzed thick around the mule, and the children ran barefoot now, their shouts echoing down the fence rows. Mabel's hands stayed busy from sun up to dusk. She moved through the day with sleeves rolled and hair pinned back, apron wet with dishwater or berry juice. She laughed more often, not big laughs, but the kind that slip out when the weight you've carried starts to shift just enough. Levi watched her in quiet ways. When she bent to lift a child or leaned her head against the porch post after dinner, his eyes followed, not greedy, not bold, just steady, like she was something worth knowing all the way through and he was taking his time learning how. One night, after the children had gone to bed, she found him outside repairing the chicken coop. The lantern hung from a nail above, casting soft gold over his shoulders. She brought him a plate cornbread, beans, a slice of cucumber from the garden. Figured you wouldn't stop long enough to eat. He glanced up and took the plate with a nod. I was waiting for the dark. Easier to think when things go quiet. She stayed near the doorway, arms crossed. The night was warm, full of cricket humming, the low rustle of wind through corn stalks. After a moment he said, "You ever think about leaving all this behind?" She didn't answer right away. Used to, when I had less to lose. And now I think about what it might be like to stay. He looked at her then, really looked. His eyes held the ache of someone who'd gone long without softness and didn't quite know what to do when it was handed back. "You ever wonder," she said, stepping closer, "if we're just tired souls trying to hang on to the same bit of hope?" He set the plate down on the workbench. "Maybe, but I'd rather hold on than let go." Her throat tightened. She looked away. "Most men I've known," she said slowly, "wanted to fix me, or keep me, like I was something broken or owned. I don't want to fix you," he said. "I just want to stand beside you, if you'll let me." That night, she didn't sleep in her room. She lay beside him in the quiet dark, the children breathing slow in the next room, her hand resting against the worn fabric of his shirt. He didn't move, didn't press, just held her hand, their fingers laced like they always belong. And when the storm finally came and hardened fast against the roof, neither of them flinched. They had known worse, and survived it. August scorched the ground. Dust rose with every step, clinging to their boots and the hems of Mabel's skirts. The garden, though watered faithfully, began to wilt beneath the weight of too much sun. The beans yellow, the cucumbers turned bitter. Even the mule stood quieter now, as if the heat had drained the stubborn right out of its bones. Mabel wiped sweat from her brow with the edge of her apron and stood from the rows, hand pressed to her back. Levi was fixing the porch rail, shirt damp with sweat, sawdust in his hair. The children had gone down to the creek with pails, hoping to catch frogs and splash the sting from their shoulders. It would have felt almost peaceful if not for the letter. It came folded in a stranger's hand, delivered by a man on a pale horse, who didn't dismount, just asked, "Are you Mabel Keene?" and held out the envelope like it was something dangerous. She nodded, heart quickening in her throat, and took it without a word. The man rode off. She didn't open it right away. She stood beneath the porch's thin shadow, watching Levi playing the top of a railing, the letter cold in her palm despite the heat. When she finally unfolded it, her breath caught. Handwriting she knew, not from Eli, but from Ella's sister, the one who'd stayed behind in Missouri. It was short, plain, just enough to shake her. "Heard you were living on a stranger's land with your children. The church you said they'll take them if you can. A woman alone shouldn't live by handouts. Come back. We can find proper homes for the little ones. There are people who can help. You don't have to live this way." Mabel stared at the paper. Not a single word about Eli. Not one mention of who Shed become since. Just the assumption that Shed lost control. That her children were burdens. That she was ashamed. She folded the letter tight into sharp corners and tucked it into the stove without a sound. It burned fast. Later, Levi found her by the garden, squatting low to pull weeds that no longer mattered. Dirt lined her wrists. Her jaw was tight. He crouched beside her. "Bad news?" She shook her head. Old judgment. Crawling out of the grave again. Someone from back east. His sister. Wants to divide the children like horses. Levi didn't speak. just rested a hand against her back. "I've worked too hard to keep them together," she whispered. "I bled for them, starved with them. You'll not have them scattered so someone else can sleep easy." He nodded. "They think because I live quiet, I live wrong." He looked at her then, not with pity but with the kind of steadiness that gave shape to things. "You live brave," he said. "There's a difference." She didn't cry, just leaned forward and let her forehead rest against his shoulder for a long, still moment. The next day, Levi rode into town. He came back with papers, land claim, guardianship notices, a marriage license application left unsigned, but folded clean and placed inside a drawer. Mabel didn't ask him to. He didn't ask her for anything either. He just said, "This way no one can say what's ours isn't." She pressed her hand to the side of his face, coal-used palm to sunburned skin, and nodded. That night, the children fell asleep full, the house quiet with the hum of cicadas and the creak of wormboard settling. In the dark, Mabel whispered, "I don't know what to do if you left." Levi reached for her hand. "I'm not going anywhere," he said. "Not unless you tell me to." September softened the edges. The air cooled just enough for blankets to return to beds, and the trees along the creek bank began to turn just a hint of gold at the edges, like the land was learning how to breathe again. Mabel stood on the porch most mornings now, coffee in hand, watching the fog rise from the ground like smoke from an old fire. It felt like a blessing, even if she didn't call it that. The children had grown stronger. Samuel chopped kindling with steady hands. Marianne took to sewing with threadbare precision, hemming old flour sacks and 2 pillowcases. Even little Ruthie had started waking before dawn to feed the mule and sweep the hearth. They worked like they understood without ever being told that something fragile had been built, and it had to be tended like a flame. Levi was up before all of them, every day, no matter the weather. Sometimes Mabel heard him outside in the dark, sharpening tools or hauling water. Other times she woke to find him sitting quietly near the stove, reading by lantern light, his shirt half-minus buttoned, hair damp from washing. The sleeves rolled in a way that made her heart pull hard against her ribs. They didn't speak about the letter again, but one morning he laid a small box on the kitchen table. Wooden, carved smooth, no law. Mabel looked up from where she was braiding Clara's hair. "What's that?" He scratched the back of his neck. "Something I made. For you." She opened it. Inside lay a ring. Simple silver, set with a flat piece of turquoise. Nothing showy. Nothing burr. Just a clean band shaped by someone with strong hands and steady purpose. "I know we ain't said the words," he murmured. "Not all of them. But I figured it was time we stopped pretending to say ain't a life." Mabel ran her thumb along the band. It was warm from the sun, not new but cared for, like the rest of what he offered. "You want to be their father?" she asked, voice low. "I already am," he said. She looked at him, then really looked. At the lines around his eyes. At the way he never filled silence with promises, only showed up with his hands and his time. "I never needed saving," she whispered. "I know," he said. "I came anyway." She slid the ring onto her finger. It fit without needing to be forced. That night, she cooked meat from the trap Levi had set by the creek. Biscuits rose golden in the cast-minus iron pan. The children sat close around the table, loud with laughter, and when Levi reached across to refill her cup, his hand lingered a second longer than it had before. After the meal, they stepped outside together. The sky was deep purple, stars strung out like quiet answers to old prayers. He touched the side of her face, rough thumb against her cheek. "I want a piece of land with you," he said. "A garden we plant every year, even when the crop fails. A roof that leaks sometimes. A life that don't look like much to others, but means everything to us." She leaned into his touch. "I want the same." Behind them, the children's voices faded into sleep. The lantern flickered in the window, and 2 souls who'd once been torn open by loss now stood on the same porch, in the same quiet, holding to each other not as escape but as home. The wedding was a spectacle. It happened under the sycamore behind the barn, where the children had hung string with dried wildflowers and scraps of cloth they'd stitched together in uneven squares. The preacher was a circuit rider who passed through once a season, and he wore boots older than most of the congregation he'd seen. He didn't speak long, just read a psalm about shelter and promise, and asked the only question that mattered. Mabel said yes with clear eyes and steady breath. Levi didn't say anything more than he needed to, but when he took her hand, his thumb brushed hers like it had every day since the night he came back from town, and she let him stay. There was no crowd to cheer, just the sound of wind moving through the trees and the shuffle of 7 children pressing closer to the front, grinning like they'd just been given a future. Afterward, they sat on the porch and ate cornbread with honey and a pie Anne had made from the last of the summer apples. The sun sank low, and the sky turned gold around the edges. Ruthie crawled into Levis' lap without asking. He didn't shift or stiffen, just wrapped his arms around her and held her there. "You think you'll stay?" she asked, voice small. Levi looked out at the land, the garden patch, the mended barn, the mules snoring in the dust. "I reckon I already have." That night, Mabel stood by the window with the lantern turned low. She slipped the ring from her finger and set it on the table. Not because she didn't want it, but because the symbol didn't matter half as much as the life it represented. The worn wood floor beneath her feet, the smell of bread rising from morning, the slow creak of Levis' footsteps as he checked the back door one last time. He came to her then, arms loose at his sides, tired as always, but not from wandering. She reached for him, and he let her. They moved like people who had earned each other not through decorations or desperate need, but through shared labor, long days, and the kind of silence that had slowly grown into trust. He kissed her forehead. She held the back of his neck, and when they lay down that night on the bed they de-built together. In the room they de-repaired board by board, there was no fear, only the breath of 2 people learning what it meant to build something not out of desperation but choice. In the distance an owl called once. Then the night wrapped around them like a quilt. And hell, stay on the long road, subscribe today.